Three, two, one. We are live. Hello and welcome to PropTechBuzz, a podcast channel where we talk to PropTech founders, CEOs, and executives from all over the globe and learn from them how they build and scale successful PropTech products and companies. So this is about the podcast. PropTechBuzz also launched its own platform last week. It is the world's only platform where PropTech products from all over the globe are launched and promoted on the global stage. So, if you are a PropTech founder or a CEO or a public company, you could launch your product onto our platform. And then in this ecosystem, we amplify the launch to the global ecosystem in a very concentrated environment with relevant stakeholders from the PropTech industry across the globe. So that is what our mission is. So do check out proptechbuzz.com. We have got some fantastic numbers, adoption rates in the early days. Close to 10,000 people have already arrived on our platform. And we have already got close to 800 registered users within just the first week. So do check them out. With that, let's welcome our guest today, Waldo Marcus. He's the industry principal and head of marketing at TPN Credit Bureau. He's dialing in all the way from Johannesburg. And TPN Credit Bureau has over 22,000 property investors that use the platform for their rental credit checks, lease documentation, and effective rental collections, free online invoicing, and more. So as you can see, I'm reading a template description, but we'll have Waldo explain all the use cases and all the solutions that TPN Credit Bureau offers. That data set is used widely by organizations such as South African Reserve Bank, commercial banks, and industry bodies. Over 800 public and private schools use their platform to collect fees faster, validate student applications for better decision making, verify employee qualifications and employment records, and screen for criminal convictions. They have very sophisticated risk algorithms and databases to ensure accurate and up to date profiling. So this is as you can see, the use cases are so varied and diverse, and that's exactly what piqued my interest. And I thought I should invite Waldo to this podcast and talk more about it, and he kindly agreed to that. So with that, let's welcome Waldo. Waldo, welcome to PropTech Buzz. How are you doing today?
Ravi, thank you very much for having me, and congratulations once again on the launch of the PropTechBuzz platform. Really exciting. I've seen a couple of South African businesses popping up there, so congratulations, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
The pleasure is mine, Waldo. So Waldo, So I read a description, and that is quite fascinating to see such wide use cases, not just from the PropTech spaces, but also on the schools, on the educational space. So it's quite fascinating. I've spoken to around 100 founders and CEOs all over the globe. I've never seen such varied use cases within the same product. So could you explain what TPN Credit Bureau is all about? We could start with the problem space. What does it solve? And then how the product is on the solution space.
Ravi, I think it's a good starting point to look at how TPN progressed from a organization. It's been going for 23 years. The organization, the business started really before PropTech was a buzzword, and before technology was adopted widely. And the intention around TPN was really to collect data around tenants that is not behaving well. And as the years go on, there's various regulations and legislation that came into play in South Africa, including the National Credit Act. And the National Credit Act then required organizations that look at consumer profiling to be a registered credit bureau. That's where TPN then registered as a credit bureau. And we are governed predominantly by that piece of legislation. So we function in a very regulated environment as we sit on very sensitive data. In South Africa, we're also regulated by the Protection of Personal Information, or known as POPI. Similar to the GDPR in the UK, where personal information when it's shared, there's a lot of regulation around it. But the problem really came around and we started in the property sector first. And about 7 years ago, we expanded that service into education, and we'll touch a little bit more on education. But on the property side, the real challenge it's great that you would be able to access a consumer's credit profile. And that relates to any credit agreement that they have within the formal environment, your mortgages, short-term credit, long-term credit, secured, unsecured credit. However, that is not necessarily the only point. If you may be paying your car financing very well, but as a tenant, you're not able, you don't pay your rental. And what we found through the years of experience that we have is it is one of the biggest ticket items on a budget within a household. So we started collecting data directly from source. So we collect data from landlords, property investors, property management companies on a monthly basis. And as I said, 23 years ago, it was literally still someone drove to them, collected the papers, came back, put it into a system, then progressed to, I don't know if some of our viewers, as stiffies and floppies, we went that route. And then finally we went onto the web. And that provided a much larger audience, and people could access it irrespective of where they were. And we really looked at saying, okay, how do we aggregate as much data as possible, and provide it in a very simple, easy to read report back to a landlord, a property investor, a managing agent, to ensure that they place a tenant. We originally only looked at bad tenant behavior. So if you didn't pay your rent or you overstayed your welcome, we collected that. Then we realized if we collect all the data, you want to place a tenant that is good. So if I can communicate that Ravi, which is a tenant that applied for a property, has for the past 5 years rented from these 3 landlords and he paid his rental on time. That gives a landlord then the opportunity to say, hey, let's negotiate on deposits. Let's negotiate on escalations because you're a good tenant. And so the database grew, and we hold data from over 22,000 companies, and on a monthly basis, some put data into the bureau on a weekly basis, depending on how often you update the database. That's all done through various integrations. We integrate into 43 different property management and school management platforms that allows the data to be ingested into the credit bureau automatically, which reduces the human error. And then that's how we collect the data. And we really then looked at it and say, with all this data that we collect, there's auxiliary problems that we need to solve here. Compliance, because within our regulations, ensuring that the information that I receive is secure and clean. And if I then present that data back to you, it's safe and secure. So we started looking at these challenges and really developed a couple of other products and services around it. And we broke it up into the credit bureau, which is the core business. Then we developed toolkits. These toolkits is widely used within the South African property sector. That includes lease agreements for commercial property, residential property. It includes HR packs. All that information that we provide or we offer to our clients is to ensure at the end that if you engage with TPN Credit Bureau, that you are compliant if you use our documents and our toolkits. With that was also other services, systems, and platforms. For instance, digitally signed lease agreements, digitally signed HR agreements, compliance agreements. We also introduced an online monitoring system, so you can look at your tenant portfolio and measure that and track it and monitor it on a monthly basis. So what we do with that is when you perform a TPN check on someone, we go in and every single month we recheck that individual. And why we do that and why it's so important is that when you apply for a property to rent, be it residential or commercial, you really it's a specific point in time. And now a tenant falls into bad times, loses its job, the business goes into liquidation, and you don't recheck that individual. So we developed a product to literally give you a dashboard overview, and we recheck your portfolio and say, well, out of your portfolio, these tenants are higher risk than the previous month. Keep a close eye on them. So we developed a bunch of products to really assist and create stickiness within the property market. And we continue to do that. We look at these opportunities, and as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, we function in a very regulated environment as a credit bureau, but also property in South Africa is heavily regulated. And that regulation comes in the forms of what you're allowed to do, not to do, how you treat tenants, how landlords, what steps can be taken. And all that regulation has really provided a good opportunity for TPN to serve its clients, irrespective of the size. And as we looked at earlier, the 22,000 clients include a landlord that owns 2 or 3 small investment properties, all the way to the largest property funds in South Africa that's listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, or the real estate investment trusts. So it's quite a big variety, and we need to ensure that our product solves solutions for the small landlord all the way to the big funds. And that's really where we saw the opportunity and continue developing our solutions in those in considering there's regulations and that continuously change. And then that creates an opportunity for us to really serve our market with unique and different solutions to make it simpler and easier to ensure compliance, mitigate risk, and ultimately improve your cash flow.
Excellent. That was you answered a lot of questions that I wanted to ask you. Okay, including what are the kind of clients that you offer. My question to you is, I'm very curious. You have had a 23-year-old history, which is something that I did not know, I was not expecting, and that was quite fascinating. My question is, what's your coverage like? Like, is this something you said it is compliant, it is regulated also by the government? What is your coverage, and why would somebody be willing to share their rental history to you?
So those are 2 very good questions, and I think that's the 23-year history has restarted with relationships, going out and meeting with the various estate agents. And I think one of the best stories to tell is the first individual and the first company that provided rental profile data to the bureau could not extract any data at that point. So it is really like the start of a social media platform. You are selling exposure, you are selling followers, yet the first person that goes online, there is no followers, there's no exposure, that it needs to grow. And
Right.
it's very similar to the bureau. You need a lot of data to come in, but the first person that adds their data and that client number, we still have client number 2. Number 2 is still an active client with TPN. Unfortunately, client 1 passed away, but we sit with those individuals that believed in the vision and said, well, I do not want to inherit someone else's bad tenant. So if I provide data, I safeguard the industry and I safeguard myself ultimately. So it prevents the spread of bad tenants. And again, we're talking about commercial tenants, so offices, retail, industrial, storage, businesses, and then of course the individual that rents for their private accommodation. So that is the kind of the start of it. And as I said, that you need number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 is really hard work. And then you get to client number 500, 600, and then it starts moving, because now I can extract the data and start providing, there's a high hit rate. And ultimately we sell hit rates. So if you put in an ID number and you identification or a passport number, you want data returned, and that data needs to we need to hold some of that data on our database. So the process was really about showing that we understood the residential property market, and that's where we started before we grew into commercial. And the second part of that question is, why would you submit data into the credit bureau? And credit bureaus work on data reciprocity. The traditional credit bureaus is that you have to provide your credit repayment data into a database, which is centrally held. Various credit bureaus, and those that you would know as like TransUnion and Experian, those are the big global players. They then collect that data and they run their own algorithms and formulas and present it back in their own platform to the individuals that put the data in there. What makes TPN different to the other traditional credit bureaus, although we also work with the experience and TransUnions and provide credit information back to landlords, property investors, and property professionals, the rental data that we hold belongs to us because we collect those. But we have to comply with data reciprocity. So what we offer our clients is in our service is that if you provide data into the TPN Credit Bureau, you get access to certain premium products. And those premium products is known as Rent Check and Edu Check and Smart Check. These are it's the most comprehensive check that you can run on a prospective tenant, on a prospective employee, on a prospective parent that you're enrolling into your private school, and it combines up to 8 different databases to create this report. So data reciprocity remains a critically important part of our business model, but also in terms of ensuring that we compliant with various regulations. And we're very strict on that. So businesses that provide that data into the bureau, they then get access to those various products. If you don't provide it, you still get access to some of our solutions, and you can still pull credit reports, but it won't be those premium products that you would like to see.
Right. I'm trying to draw a comparison. If somewhere someone is listening to this conversation, so I'm from India, right? So we are talking about emerging markets here, and I do not see that there is any comprehensive database that holds credit history of rental behaviors of a large set of people. If somewhere someone wants to start this is going to be hard, right? Because you have had 23 years of trial and error and then became mature, and now it is a well-formed engine. But what would be your advice for somebody who would want to pick this idea and implement this into a large ecosystem? How would this work out?
So you would definitely have to look first at how that specific region or country's regulation in terms of personal information, how that's processed. Second thing is there regulations around consumer credit? And that will give you direction in terms of credit bureaus and how those are functioned. The challenge would be in some emerging markets where there is no clear guidelines. It is both a opportunity and a challenge for you, because it opens up the market for anyone to enter, and you're going to have potentially a lack. You're going to struggle to aggregate that data. So it's going to be based on region. It's going to be based on regulation and legislation within that specific country, and ultimately it's about ensuring that you have the technology and the platforms. And of course, the relationships with various systems so that it allows you to automatically and digitally bring that data in versus us starting 23 years ago, which was a very manual process. Of course, those things change. And now, technology has really made it a lot easier, safer. And again, on the opposite side of safer, we know cyber attacks and how does organizations protect themselves, but also how is regulations structured to protect you, but also the consumer's data that you hold. So that would be the look, to the first departure point, in my opinion, is to see what that region holds. And of course, is there an appetite for the product? We found that the appetite was the challenge that businesses sat with was where do we find a list of people that's not paying their rental? And that was ultimately we would say, hang on, what happens if we can create that register? And there's various registers globally. There is registrations on sexual offenses and child protection and criminal. But on rental, because it is predominantly in most developing countries sitting within private ownership, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Everyone wants to run it differently. So those would be the departure points for me to really look at. But there is definitely an opportunity looking at emerging markets, and we're definitely looking at that as well, to see what is the opportunity and how do we do this, knowing that we were able to scale and we've really, really dominated the market in South Africa. Not so dominated. We've really been a leader in the market, in collecting how we collect the data and how we provide it back to them.
So could you also like work with the government, saying that hey, by doing this, we are making the entire ecosystem transparent. It is good for the ecosystem. So could you also influence the government, saying that hey, why don't you become the arbiter? Give us the regulatory framework so that we act on it, and we also make money through it. But could you does it work in favor of the governments also to support this?
Yes, and we work closely with various regulators in South Africa, and we work closely with them by providing them access to insights. And in the introduction, we refer to the Reserve Bank,
Yeah,
commercial banks,
yeah.
McKinsey and Company, Consulting Group, and various other large organizations and regulatory bodies would approach us and say, what is the rental escalations in South Africa? Because we hold the biggest database
Hmm.
of rental payments, escalations. So we
Hmm.
can derive a lot of information from that data, which we anonymize, and we
Hmm.
provide those back to various regulatory and government organizations to make informed decisions.
Hmm.
So we look at rental escalations that impacts the CPI or inflation within the country.
Got
That provides guidance in terms of interest and repo rates. So the banks look at it and say, rather than try and find this information ourselves. So yes, you are able. We do a lot of surveys because we have access to consumers and landlords within the industry. We do a lot of research, and that research papers is then widely used to say, what is the pain points? What are the challenges?
it.
Are we seeing a lack of supply in new rental properties? How do
Hmm.
we push that up? Affordable housing. How do we provide affordable housing? How do we provide certain regulatory requirements when we place people into a government-funded and subsidized housing? What is the right price point? So it's both from a government perspective, but again, you will need to provide and show value add to those organizations. And
Got it.
once you provided that value add, they will come to you
Got
and
it.
they will ask you the questions. And again, we remain independent and agnostic. As a credit bureau, people look to you to have a objective view about the industry. And if you maintain that, and that's why we won't align with a specific government or political party, we remain completely agnostic, so that the information I provide is based on data and not opinions and not feelings. It's really based on the data and what the data tells us.
Got it. I'm sorry. I'm just very curious about these topics. So when there is a regulatory framework, and under that body of regulation, you are acquiring this data from people. Could you could you then monetize this for your own company? Like, could you sell more products and run a profitable enterprise, because this is public data, no? How, or is this a gray zone that you need to be careful of and stuff like that?
It's a very fine line, and again, the revenue model of a credit bureau is a interested party comes to you with permission, of course, from the consumer to understand their credit history, the various properties or deeds they have on their asset value, as well as their rental payment behavior historically. So you have permission from there. They purchase that information from you to make informed decisions. Our information that we offer to some of the other organizations, as I mentioned, the anonymized data. So it's really an aggregation and saying how many tenants have failed to make their rental payment at the end of the month. What's that percentage? So it's that we offer as a value add to the industry, because it's whatever, if it benefits municipalities, cities, government, it will help them provide better services and provide solutions that is mandated by to them to deliver. So the information that we provide there, we don't monetize. Yes, there's an opportunity to do so. We do specific data studies for large-scale developers or developers that's interested to go into a region. They want to look at feasibility. They want to look at potential earnings. Those we run specifically, and those we commercialize, we commoditize, we commercialize, and we do charge for those. But we're selective. We decide if it's going to benefit the industry as a whole, we try and assist as much as we can. If it's for a specific commercial endeavor, we do charge for them, because we work very hard to ensure that our data integrity is there, and that our data continues to grow. And that is, it takes a huge amount of resources to ensure that you keep growing that database.
Got it. Excellent. You also mentioned, and I was reading it, that let me just open that. It says, how does TPN credit checks through WhatsApp? So you have been promoting this nice, exciting feature. Do you want to explain what's this WhatsApp integration, and how do you do credit checks through WhatsApp?
So we've introduced WhatsApp, and it's a channel to engage with the credit bureau. And the problem that we're solving there is that a lot of property professionals, estate agents, when they go out to show a property, or they meet a potential tenant or potential buyer, you don't. It's on demand. You want immediate gratification, and you're not going to, if you've got a prospective buyer or tenant and they want to go ahead and apply for the property, you don't want to say to them, hang on, I want to go home first and log into a system and check. You can do it right there, and it provides you instant feedback. It is secure, and we use a cell phone number that's linked to a TPN Credit Bureau account. The account it goes through quite a extensive vetting process in the background, so we make sure that there's no fraud or people are stealing information. So the person that is engaging with us, we have identified, we've done background checks on them. So when we provide them access to this WhatsApp channel, it is secure and verified. And it was really to say to a estate agent that we know your core challenge that you're facing is that you need to see as many people as possible per day, so you can sign as many deals as possible per day. Let's make it instant. Let's give you opportunity and access to it on the spot, so you can then shake hands and say, great, your credit check came back all good, willing to sign the deal. And that's really where it comes from. And we're building that channel out, and we've had really positive uptake on it. But it's really taking a channel that is widely used in South Africa. About 93% of internet users, mobile users in South Africa, communicate on WhatsApp. So it's a big channel in South Africa, and that gave us the opportunity to really say, let's look at taking it to market. And it's it's engaging. The consumer experience is excellent on it. In South Africa, we're all familiar with it, so it's not something new. I think it's an innovation where we took two channels or two products that's very different, and we said, how do we bring these together? How do we bring a household name like TPN and WhatsApp together? And it's been going really well, and we're going to expand on it. So there's other checks that one can perform. We provide deed searches, company director searches. So there's a variety of products, but we've also learned that we roll out, we test the market as we go. And we listen to a problem, and sometimes you sit down with a client and you know very well how this goes, that they will give you this big problem they have, and then you give them the solution and they don't use the solution. And you've spent millions of dollars on research and development. Development in itself is very expensive nowadays. So it's really, we took this out, and it's been a really good success, and we want to build it out. And it's a really good channel for especially smaller businesses that don't have the staff and the resources that some of the large organizations have, that has a dedicated department or team just doing this. And part of that problem that we're solving with estate agents, especially estate agents and smaller landlords, that doing it on the go, or that's their second job, so they, as a side hustle, they're investing and they want to make these decisions, is we introduced eSign and eSign Plus. It's a digital signature system that allows for two-factor authentication. It complies with all the necessary regulations. We have a full legal department, and every single thing that we do or develop goes through them to ensure that we're fully compliant. And the e-signature system is also a very seamless process, where you receive, as a tenant, you receive your lease agreement from your landlord. It goes, you sign it digitally via mobile phone, or via your desktop. It goes back to the landlord. It's signed. They sign it. It's saved in the repository. And again, it was due to various regulations. You need to have a signed lease to make it easier to take necessary steps. There's certain clauses that you need to have in there to make it easier. So we looked at the ecosystem, and we constantly engage with various size organizations, individuals, people that's on the ground, that's dealing with day-to-day challenges, and say, how do we take technology and make it simpler and easier to transact, not just with us, but to get the deal across the line, to place that tenant, to ensure your portfolio has got good returns and your shareholders are happy. So I think that is very, very important for us, and we remain extremely committed to it. And WhatsApp was one of them. We listened, we heard, and we developed very quickly to get this out to the market. And it's been a success, and we're very grateful for that.
This is super fascinating. On our platform, PropTechBuzz, we not only promoting products, but we are also promoting exciting new features. Okay, so this is surely a candidate to promote and launch and to make this even more popular. So thanks for sharing that. Also, I before I go to the MRI buying story, help us understand on the education, on the school sector, so I can understand on the rental and on the commercial side, both for residential and commercial, what is the use case for the schools, and how did that tie in into this TPN story?
So education in South Africa is, again, also regulated. And it's for good reason. It's your children. You want to make sure that they go to a safe school and that the people that teach has been vetted. And so the education side really started with the TPN verified employment data that we started collecting. And verified employment is data that we collect directly, again, from source, but it's verified. It's not me writing down that I'm working for TPN, I've been there for 5 years. It's data that is submitted to a regulatory body, but we get that data as well, with permission, of course.
Right.
And we saw the opportunity here that within education, there is 3 challenges that we want to solve. And the one is to ensure the safety and security of the pupils. And in South Africa, there's regulations around that you need to be criminally checked before you become a teacher. If you have a conviction, there's certain convictions that's exempted, so you can still teach. Then there are certain convictions that preclude you and exclude you from teaching minors, and that's anyone under the age of 18. So there's a big process, and it's required to do those checks on a regular basis for all your staff. So we introduced a criminal check, which works with fingerprint biometrics, and that then provides us with certificates back that we've checked the following teachers, and they either have a conviction or not conviction. And then additional regulations was introduced a couple of years after that, and that requires a teacher also to be checked within the child protection and sexual offences registers, which is 2 government registers that's held separately, and you need to perform those checks in those registers. So we brought those together and say, let's develop a product that we do 1 check and we go and do the rest for you. That was the one big compliance element that really helped us to go into the school market. And as I said earlier, going into the school market, we really started listening to what these schools are battling with. Again, just for context, in South Africa, we've got private schools, and these are organizations where school fees are 100% paid, or fundraising is taking place. And then we've got government schools, and government schools are funded and subsidized by the government. And within the government schools, there is what we call fee-paying government schools. So a portion of the school's funding comes from the government, and a portion comes from charging parents school fees. And that then provided us, we looked at it and say, right, in private schools, can a person afford the school fees before you bring them in? And because of the regulation, you cannot I enroll my child into a private school, month 3, I stop paying the school fees, because you cannot withhold education from a child. They cannot just say, listen, close the doors, the kid is no longer allowed to come to school. There is a certain process that you need to follow, and that can be a long process. But in most cases, you need to allow the pupil or the child to go through the academic year. So that became a challenge for schools because they still need to pay salaries and maintain their premises and provide the resources, but parents stop paying for two reasons. One, they know the system, so therefore there's potential abuse, so that they know I'll pay month 1, 2, and then I'll stop, and then at the end of the year I'll catch up. So they start using it as cash flow. And then there's the other side where people really just can't afford it, but they want their best education for their child. And there's a responsibility from a business as well as a school to ensure that I don't overextend my consumer. So I'm not allowed to give Ravi $1 million loan if I know he can only afford $100,000 loan. So there's certain checks and balances that we need to go in, and that's on the private school side. So we help those private schools understand parents' credit risk. If they have high credit risk, what could they bring in a sponsor, or do they need to apply for a bursary within that school? On the government side, it's not that you cannot prevent a parent from enrolling their child, and there is what we call an exemption process. An exemption process is I need to pay $1,000 a month school fees to the school, but I cannot afford it. I go through an exemption application process, which is prescribed by various legislation. And then what the government would do is they would subsidize that $1,000, but the schools get a lot less. So it puts strain on that school to provide the resources, good education. And what we want to prevent is fraudulent applications, and we provide a service to those schools. So this, what the school would do is say, we received this application for exemption. Meanwhile, the applicant, the parent, or the sponsor, they're driving fancy cars, but they don't want to pay the school fees because they know this is an exemption process. So we prevent that fraudulent application, which places strain on the school, but also on the government. And that is really how we positioned the product. And again, when we entered the school market, we really wanted to do good first. We wanted to ensure that pupils are educated by people with the right qualifications. They don't have convictions, so they don't pose a risk to the people that they teach. And on the other side is to help schools collect those school fees, make sure they have the resources to provide this excellent education service, and prevent fraudulent applications and people abusing a system. And it's proven to be very successful. And although we only looking at 800 schools in South Africa, it's growing each year. We've got really the top private schools using our systems and our services. And again, we also run these surveys, and we provide data to the Department of Education, anonymized data to say, this is where your challenges are sitting. This is how much school fees are growing, really helping them to make informed decisions and plan for the future, budget correctly, understand cash flow. And that has really worked very well with the education space. And data reciprocity remains critically important. To access premium services, you need to provide data on parents' payment profiles. So how parents pay their school fees. And again, that's how we build that database of parents.
Excellent. Cool. Now let's move on to the interesting, the most interesting part, which I wanted to understand, is how the story of MRI software buying TPN Credit Bureau pan out. So it happened somewhere in October last year. Am I right?
Correct. Yes.
Got it. So what were the alignments, and why did MRI find this as a lucrative option to buy? Could you shed some background on this story?
So the MRI acquisition, as you said, was finalized last year, and we share a lot of clients. So MRI, which is a global PropTech company, their subsidiary, or the company in South Africa, provides a product called Property Central, and they service large-scale clients and medium-sized clients. So the large listed property companies use their property management software and systems. And so we've had a long-standing relationship with MRI from a data coming from their property management software systems clients into TPN Credit Bureau. So we share a lot of the large clients, and they could see the opportunity to say, all right, how do we bring these two companies together? And the data that we hold is very important. But again, what's very important to the viewers today is, as a credit bureau, we're a ring-fenced entity. It's a ring-fenced entity, so therefore there's certain data point access which the holding company were not allowed to access because it's regulated, right. And that is why we've held on to the 43. I think it's now actually sitting at 48 companies that provide data into it, and they are competitors of MRI from a property software perspective, but we're ring fenced, and we, as I said, again, regulation that ensures that data is safe and secure. But there is an overlap, and we've recently introduced an integration of some of the TPN Credit Bureau solutions into the Property Central environment, so that you don't have to go between your property management software platform and TPN Credit Bureau. You can now do it all inside your Property Central platform, and those services is again what we list. We know what the clients came out and say, this would be great. We this is what we're sitting with. This is the challenges we face. So there is, and they're not the only one we integrate with. There's some other companies we provide, we integrate with that allows to transact within TPN Credit Bureau. But what really resonated, and I think why TPN shareholders and why the TPN heritage staff really resonated with MRI, it's to create an open and connected ecosystem for property. And that was one of the core values that we held and continue to hold. And that is what MRI and Property Central and MRI Agora, which is their next big products, is really built around. It's to make sure that you can, we want to play nice with everyone, and we play nice with everyone. And that core value is what really resonated, and what's made the acquisition of TPN and the merging into MRI a incredible experience, and been very successful, not just for TPN, but for the clients of MRI and TPN and other property companies that uses us.
Got it. How big is MRI, by the way? I've known them, but I've never tried to research how big they are. Like, are they, like, in terms of numbers? Would you know?
So employees, the last count was 3,380. MRI functions across three major regions: APAC, EMEA, and the States. We fall under the EMEA region, which is the UK, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and we serve Africa from South Africa.
Got it. And I'm very curious to know if there are other major global players like MRI also in South Africa. Is this very common that there are other global players also pretty active in South African region?
Yes, there is. In South Africa, we have very healthy competition, and is definitely beneficial to the consumer or our clients, because it ensures innovation takes place. It ensures that prices are market related. So there is a very healthy competition. I think there's definitely opportunity for moving more into Africa, yes, I think that's going to remain very healthy. A lot of people see South Africa as part of South Africa, as part of Africa, but let's get South Africa right, and that will help us to understand how do we roll out. And that's worked very well for various large organizations, and it's kind of a feather in our cap that work with us. There's great skill in South Africa. I think we're starting to see a lot of development work being moved into Cape Town specifically, which they call the Silicon Valley of Africa. So there's really, the skills are there, the training, the education, the infrastructure is there. It's a good time zone. Even when we start looking at meeting with our other regions, we kind of sit in the middle, and it allows for good handover of work So it's been good, and I think a lot of larger businesses, not just in the prop tech space, but also in various other sectors, have seen that opportunity and has been engaging with it for decades now. In the prop tech space, there's definitely a rise in the number of prop tech companies out of South Africa, and it's very heartwarming to see these companies coming up and unique solutions and unique user experiences that hopefully is adopted globally.
So that is the last you ended. Hopefully, that is adopted globally. Could you shed some light, because you seem to be very experienced in your industry, and this is one of my favorite topics, because primarily when startups start, they do not start with a global ambition. They are always trying to solve a small problem, and hopefully they become global, right? So, what is your advice on startups or anybody who's listening to this conversation? Say somebody a startup in South Africa, uh, what are the traits or what are the elements that is required to to start a company that has the potential to become a global player? Because real estate is very local in nature, right? So do you believe that these companies can actually become global, and what does it take to become global?
So there's I think there's two ways of looking at it. If you're going to enter into a space which is heavily regulated, you will need to understand the regions that you're going into. And again, you can enter into regions selectively. We look at things globally that we have to we have to go in and we have to cover the entire globe. Not necessarily. You can go and say selective and say, in Africa, I'm looking at South Africa and I'm looking at Kenya and Nigeria. Those are the three. Get to grips with the regulations. If you are entering a market that's not heavily regulated, it's completely different. And most of the time people have the same problem. It's the solution that is applied to it that makes a great product or a platform. A simple thing is in the property market is, what's the two biggest challenges that a landlord face is finding the right tenant to fill my property. And the second one is to ensure that I collect my rental. Those are the two core functions. And if you go and speak to someone in Australia, and you speak to someone in the US, or you speak to someone in the UK, they will have very similar challenges. There might be regulation around it that's different, but those are the core challenges. How do I solve those core challenges? And from there is to find the right tenant. Then we start seeing platforms developing like Flow in South Africa, where they say, how do I link Facebook and social media and internet? But if I go to someone in Germany and say, how do you find your tenants? They're like, oh, well, most probably on the internet, and we use social media. It's the same problem. It's just the application that makes it unique and different. And then from there, what other services do you plug on there to make it a great experience and ensure stickiness? I think one of the things that when TPN was built was really about, we should be able to scale. So what happens if we get 10 data files in and tomorrow we get 10,000 and the next month 100,000? That was the global mindset that was taken. So what happens if all of a sudden we get someone in and say, listen, I've got 5,000 units, I've got 20,000 records, can you ingest that? And if you are able to say yes, that is where you can grow. And then when you move it into other countries, the technology and the tech stack is there, the experience is there. What you now need to do is understand the regulation and legislation in that space. And is that a viable entry point? Is there opportunity? What does the competitor landscape look like? But again, scalability is easy, and technology has really provided access to global markets, but also taking down borders. I can communicate, you sitting in Germany, I'm sitting in Johannesburg, and we're having a fantastic conversation because of technology. That's no longer inhibitor. The inhibitor is how do I identify the problem, how do I solve that problem, and how do I scale that solution?
Right. You mentioned about Flow, right? Flow Living. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. So they are a great example to how to scale globally. Am I right? So they just had a big distribution partner in multiple regions. So that is one of the success stories that often crops up from South Africa. How do you see the difference between? I'm actually deviating from the script now because
No, please. we're having a conversation.
You come across as some real thought leader. You know this industry in and out, and that's why I'm posing this question. Otherwise, I would have just stuck to TPN. How do you see the healthy competition between, or unfair? Because I've seen that there are. I usually speak to smaller founders, and they often say that it's not a level playing field between homegrown players, and then there comes a big player who just dominates a market because they have a lot of marketing budget. They control, they dominate the narrative. They are always they have the enough. They steal the limelight in conferences and trade fairs and so on and so forth. What would be your advice or suggestions to startups who are homegrown but finding it hard to compete with the big players, like a small property management company with a large property management company? Is it not an unfair battlefield, and how should they look at that fight?
Well, I think there's when we say it's an unfair battlefield, it's usually only unfair when there is certain barriers put in place, and these barriers are legislative, regulated. That would be a barrier where the legislator is providing limitations to it, and we tend to look at it from we're a small company compared to a TPN, a credit bureau, compared to the TransUnion and the Experian. And you have options to partner with them if you have a unique solution set, or you've taken the problem from a different approach. Price point becomes different in the world. If you're a startup and you bootstrap and you are lean, you will appeal to a market and to an audience that would want those services at a lower cost. And I'm using cost not to commoditize any service, but there's an option to it. Or it's just a different approach. And if we look in South Africa, the banking sector, the retail banks, and there's 5 large retail banks, and recently a Time Bank entered the market. It's a completely digital bank that entered, no branches, everything is done online, and they do it at a very low cost, and the bank is doing very well. So one would say they would have
they're called the neobanks.
Yes. So they've entered the market in South Africa specifically, where there's the big 5, big 6 banks have dominated for years. And here they're making inroads, and we can look at various other organizations and businesses. It is ensuring that your solution is unique, and it's easy to say. And I've had my own business. I had a consulting firm, and you consulted, and you go up against the bigger guys. But what makes you unique is that I'm giving you my attention. I'm not giving you a process. And some clients want that. They don't want a process. They want a personal engagement. They want to know who they speak to. And I'm not saying that the bigger organizations can't provide it. It's just a different way. And there is, yes, restrictions into capital, but what we've really seen is that there's a big appetite by various funds to invest in startups, to really see, guys, if you have a good product. And yes, Flow is, again, a well-known success story in South Africa. And there's a list of other PropTech and FinTech companies in this country and globally that's enjoying these funds. It's making sure that you're unique in what you provide, and if not in what you provide, how you provide it. And if you're not, and how you provide it is the cost at which you provide it. And those are the 3 key things for business model to develop, is really seeing what makes you stand out. And like when you started PropTechBuzz, it started off with 1 or 2 ideas, and then as you grow, you're starting to see people buying into it. And it's got nothing to do with that I'm client number 700 or 7,000. It's because I'm a client, and I align with the value that you provide.
Nice, excellent, thank you. Let's come back to TPN. So you're doing some exciting stuff. You got bought over. How do you see the next next couple of years? What is the kind of innovations that you are bringing in? Could you lay out the roadmap for near future?
So for us, it's there's a couple of products that we've been working on, and the next iteration of eSign Plus. which is our digital signature product that we currently have it out with 2 clients. They're testing it. We're looking at it from a development side and how do we scale that. That's an exciting new product that we're bringing out or growing extensively. And then we've got a couple of integrations that within Property Central, specifically in South Africa, but we still have a lot of opportunity in South Africa to grow the TPN Credit Bureau product and the solutions. And what's interesting in our world is when legislation change, we need to be right there changing with it. And if there's additional regulations coming in, it gives us an opportunity to provide solutions to our clients. And I think the core that we'll always hold on to is that someone that has just started off in property must be able to use it. Someone that's running a $50 billion property fund must be able to use it and must be able to solve those problems. And that's a fundamental stance that we take and a strategy that we take when we look at new opportunities and what our roadmap is. There's a couple of secrets that we're working on, not allowed to talk out of turn, but there's some really good stuff that we want to bring out and that we're changing in the business that we know is a requirement, and it's exciting stuff that we want to do. And then of course Africa is there. We want to see growth into Africa and to the Middle East. There's great opportunity there, but that would be based on regulation and legislation at the end of the day.
Excellent. Well, this brings us to the end of a very, very fascinating conversation with Waldo. Waldo, to be very transparent, I did not imagine that this conversation would be so fascinating. Okay, I thought I will stick to TPN, but you came across as a thought leader. As I said, you know the industry in and out. So it was, sometimes I turn selfish and I satisfy my own curiosity. I go off script, but thank you for accommodating. And this turned out to be a very, very fascinating conversation. I can imagine I'm going to be sharing clippings of some interesting bits on LinkedIn and then getting them to listen to the whole interview. But thank you for your time, Waldo.
Absolute pleasure, Ravi. Thank you for having me.
All right. See you around. Bye-bye.